incumbent on all of us to think about those that died on September 11th, but also to try to learn something from the experience and try to learn something from it. Now it's 12 years from that time. But for me personally, and I wasn't there when it happened, I was in Queens, but this affected many people on many, many different levels. Not just the people that were in the towers, or the people that lost their jobs. Many, many people lost their jobs afterwards who had work in the area. But I was just in a marriage counseling session with somebody about 2 weeks ago, and the person told me that he was standing there next to the building and saw bodies flying down from the building. He was traumatized by that experience. It actually caused a whole chain reaction that was quite negative for this person. But personally, anyone who knows me, I like focusing on positive. And I think, to me, when I think about September 11th, the first thing that comes to my mind is those firefighters and policemen running up the steps while everybody else was running down. And that image in my mind, obviously they didn't know that the buildings were going to collapse, but running up into a disaster as everybody else is running down for their life is something that made a tremendous impact on me personally. Because what they did at that moment was they went outside of themselves. They stepped outside of themselves. It wasn't about a job at that point. It wasn't about a career. It wasn't about even that somebody instructed them to do this. But it was, they had an opportunity to save others. And that calling became so great that nothing else really made a difference at that moment. And although we should never be in that situation, that we should have to make that kind of decision or be in that situation where we have to do something like that. I think it's something that when we think about this time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when we think about what this time is about, I think it's a time when we need to think about how we can step out of ourselves a little bit and think about others, care about others. The Emet Fellowship program that we have, the Emet Leaders Fellowship, we just had our rejuvenation yesterday. Well, rejuvenated. Yesterday, and the Leaders Fellowship, we focus on leadership. And one of the messages that I was sharing with the students yesterday was to be a real leader, you have to be willing to step a little bit outside of yourself. And I think that is a message that's very appropriate to all of us. I wanted to share, when I was Rosh Hashanah, I heard this on Rosh Hashanah, there were a few people that heard this yesterday, I apologize. But it was very powerful to me, and I want to just repeat this. There was a rabbi who said over something that he had heard personally from Rabbi Hirsch Weinreb. Hirsch Weinreb was the former head of the OU, Orthodox Union, probably the largest Jewish organization. Next comes Emet. Not yet. But with your help, yeah. And a very, very renowned psychologist and learned Talmid Chacham. And Rabbi Weinberg now is in his late 70s, but this story took place in the 1960s, and he only recently said over the story that he was having some doubts in his own faith. Even rabbis sometimes have doubts in their own faith. He was having doubts. So he called up the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Lubavitcher Rebbe was known to be a person of great wisdom, a person, a very caring person. And he called up the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But the Lubavitcher Rebbe would not usually take people's calls, so you have to speak through the gabbai, the sexton. So he calls and he says, I would like to speak to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He says, who is this? He says, a Yid, a Jew from Baltimore. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe says to him through the messenger, he says, what do you want? He says, I'm having some questions about my faith, and I feel like the Rebbe can help me, guide me through my questions. The Rebbe says back through the messenger and says, if you live in Baltimore, the person to speak to is Rabbi Hirsch Weinberg. He's the one who I'm going to give you a blessing right now, can answer all your questions. So Rabbi Weinberg responds back through the messenger and he says, please tell him that I am Rabbi Hirsch Weinberg. And he says back to him, and the message, without a beat, the Lubavitcher Rebbe responds back to the messenger to tell him, he says, in that case, tell him he needs to speak to himself more than he does. And basically, Rabbi Weinberg made the point of saying that very often we know what we need to do. We know what's right. We know, let's say, we should spend more time with our children. We know we spend more time with our children. We know that we should be doing these things. But we don't do it. And I think one of the messages that we can incorporate for Rosh Hashanah as we go into Yom Kippur is to talk to ourselves a little bit more. Maybe not in public, but to talk to ourselves and to remind ourselves of what we really want to do, how we really want to live our life. So often in life we get distracted. We get distracted by just the day-to-day grind that we forget what's really important and what's really valuable. I often share the story of a philosophy professor on the first day of class with the golf balls. You guys remember this story? Philosophy professor on the first day of class, I'll just say it quickly, she takes an empty jar of mayonnaise, she puts it on the table, and she tells the class, is this jar empty or full? And they all say it's empty. And then she takes a bag of golf balls and she fills the golf balls into the jar. And she says, is it full or empty? And they say, it's full. She goes underneath it, she takes a bag of pebbles. She fills it up with pebbles. And she says, is it full? By now they're quiet. And then she takes a bag of dirt and sand, pours it in. And finally, liquid chocolate. And she tells the class, she says, this is a metaphor for your life. The jar is your life. The golf balls are the most important things in your life. Those are the things you would literally die for. Those are the things that you'll talk about at someone's funeral. Their values, their community, their family. What's the next level? What's the pebbles? The pebbles are the things that are very important, but not as important as that. Your job, your career, your getting your raise, getting your car, your house. They're very important. But you can lose all that, and if you still have a family that loves you, and if you have values that to hold on to, you'll be okay. You could go from your house back into your apartment, and you'll be okay. If you have a family that loves you, you'll be okay. If you have values to hold on to, you can withstand anything. What about the sand and the dirt? She said that's what most of us spend most of our life doing. Worrying, gossiping, all the silly things that we spend most of our life doing. And she said to the class, she says, what are most of our lives filled with? What do you think? The sand, the pebbles, or the golf balls? You know what the sand is, right? The sand is shtiyot, the silly things, worrying about the garbage, worrying about, you send someone a text message, they don't respond within 30 seconds, you wonder if they still like you, you know? The silliest, stupidest things that we worry about so much of our life, right? What's our jars made up of?
Sand.
A lot of sand. In this economy, not as many pebbles, right? But how many golf balls? How many golf balls? Not that many. So she says, why is this a metaphor? She goes, if you make a priority for the golf balls, there'll be plenty of room for pebbles and sand. But if you let your jar get filled with sand and pebbles, then what are you going to say? What's the most common line that people say when you ask them, why don't you do what you know you should be doing? I was just speaking today at Queensborough College, so a very nice group of students over there. And I asked them a question. I said, how much is your eyesight worth to you?
Right.
Okay?
Right.
If you were a billionaire, would you give up $1 billion for your eyesight? You would, right? Would you give up $1 billion for your child's eyesight? You would. But that same child, you might not spend any time with that child. Right? There was a true story. I heard it was true, but I didn't hear it firsthand. Of a child whose father was a lawyer, and he comes to his father. His father's a very busy guy, and he comes to his father, and he was begging him as a 9-year-old child. He says, tell me how much you make an hour. And the father's like, no, why are you bugging me? It's okay, I give you everything you need. He goes, I want to know how much you make an hour. And finally the father told him, I bill $400 an hour. And the kid says, I have in my bank for my birthday $300. Can I get 45 minutes of your time? Okay? True story. We don't make it a priority even though we know that should be a priority. Because we're so full. Because we are full. Our jars are full. Somebody asked in the back of the class, what about the liquid chocolate? She said the metaphor for that is always room for chocolate. I'd like to introduce the next speaker, my Gutmacher. Before I do so, I want to give a special mazel tov. I cannot count every person here who deserves a mazel tov, but almost everyone does. I want to give a very special mazel tov. If I missed you, please forgive me. To Milana and Johnny. And Johnny, I just met today for the first time. Milana has been an Emet student for a long time. We just got married about 2 weeks ago. How many?
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. Oh, the old married couple already. Okay, 3 weeks ago. and to Anatoly and Rima, who came here today with their baby girl, and to Yuri and Michael's birthday today. Yuri had a baby not so long ago, right? A few months ago. What? Right here? Okay, mazel tov to everyone. And may this year be a year of happiness, of joy, of success in all your endeavors. In order to make a real success, it means we have to turn even what we think is a negative moment into a positive moment. Next speaker today is Rabbi Gutmacher, a very, very integral part of the Emet organization, who, as Rabbi Gutmacher spoke Rabbi Kigel spoke yesterday, that there's 5 different levels of holiness. And when I introduced Rabbi Gutmacher last night, I said Rabbi Gutmacher, he's constantly in that 5th level. And occasionally we rise to that point, and he's like, yes, I'm waiting for you. I'm here. Please give your attention to Rabbi Gutmacher.